Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and good evening, depending on where in the world you are. My name is Saldus Dusha Sheriff. I'm the founder and managing partner of Africa Risk Management and Compliance. Really excited today to be joined by an old friend of our organization, Mr. Dibblex Lesalon. And Dibblex joined us in one of our previous webinars when we talked about the whole issue of the illegal wildlife trade in Africa and the impact that it was having on these precious animals that are so strongly part of our identity and about our part of our continent's identity. Dibblex is joining me today. Dibblex, you're most welcome. Dibblex is joining me today to talk a little bit about
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Saldis, for this opportunity again to connect. I'm really happy that to be doing this follow-up, interview with you and following up on our webinar, which was very insightful. Since then, I have been, continuing to put, my feet on the ground. To work in advancing the tourism industry here in Kenya. It's the high season in the Mara where I work, so we are expecting, double digits of figures in terms of the guests that we are getting in. In terms of podcasting, I did one podcast with Holly Badge, an adventurer and the founder and leader, World Female Ranger Week and the international NGO How Many Elephants, which was fantastic as we gear up towards celebrating our rangers on the 31st of July this month, which is actually next week Sunday. So a lot of things going on, and and I've also.
So Dibblex, we really wanted to find out a little bit more about the state and condition of the wildlife industry in Kenya today. And perhaps you could tell us about some of the sort of major changes that you've seen impacting the wildlife sector in Kenya over the last couple of years or so.
Thank you for the question, Saldis. That's a very good question. And maybe to take us back to independence times, just before Kenya attained her independence, I've read a couple of articles and information regarding how wildlife was in big numbers, roaming around our areas or our near our homes, and just in the early 60s and in the early 70s, we encountered a lot of poaching, and a lot of our mega fauna, the elephants and the rhinos, were being poached for their horn, really. And up to the 1970s, where Kenya really stepped up her game in terms of protecting her wildlife, which was an income generating asset at the time, and safari industry was big. A lot of tourists used to come to Kenya to view wild game in our parks and reserves. That led to the formation of national parks and reserves across the country, which were gazetted and made private. We also went on to form the Kenya Wildlife Service unit, which is solely responsible for running these parks and reserves across the country, to manage, to protect in terms of, deploying their rangers, training wardens, tracking wildlife, in these parks and reserves. So over the years, we have, really, stepped up our game in terms of management and in terms of solidifying our presence on the ground in terms of, being close to these, parks and reserves. But on the downside, we have also experienced a lot of poaching, across the country, which is fueled by the demand for rhino horn and for elephant ivory in overseas markets, and that led Kenya to ban trophy hunting in 1977. And also over the years, we have seen a lot of, conservancies coming up, which is a really exciting model of conservation here in the country. And this model has really worked because over 65% really of Kenya's wildlife is found near communal lands, just, in the communal areas, pastoralist areas. And that is why the conservancy model, that is why our local NGOs and the government, have stepped up, their game into formation of these conservancies, which are community-led and community-owned, because it's the community that leases their land to the private NGOs and to the government, really, to conduct conservation activities in their lands in order to protect our wildlife. So since the 21st, on the onset of the 21st century, we have experienced boom and regained numbers. Our wildlife numbers have rebounded, during COVID, we recorded zero poaching for rhino, which is a big achievement for Kenya. And Saldis, it will be very interesting to note also that elephant populations are increasing, lion populations are increasing. We have recorded a birth of twins, elephants, birthed in the Amboseli. Just last week in Nairobi National Park, we recorded a giraffe which birthed twins. So I would say the state of wildlife in Kenya today has really changed, with a lot of, enforcement, a lot of protection, a lot of resources, being pumped into protecting our wildlife. As much as we are not there yet, I would say that a lot of work is being done on the ground. A lot of partnerships, a lot of financing, a lot of youth and local community engagement to protect our wildlife. So we have numerous, parks and reserves. We have, almost over 20 conservancies, for example, here in the Mara. So it's really exciting to see all these facets, all these things happening at once in order to ramp up our efforts in protecting our wildlife and into ensuring that our wildlife survives and thrives. So I would say the state has really changed. Wildlife numbers are growing, and a lot of involvement is happening also on the ground in protecting this wildlife and into creating economic value for this wildlife, and into understanding why the wildlife matters, why we need it, why it is important for our economy, why it is important for our heritage and our story as Kenyans and as Africans. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dibblex. What are some of the drivers of the illegal wildlife trade, and who are some of the people that are behind?
Thank you, Saldis, for that one. And if you look at the illegal wildlife trade, we are talking about poaching here, and we are talking about losing our wildlife to the demand of wildlife parts across the world. And how it manifests itself is through poaching primarily. And some of the drivers, if I can mention some of the drivers that are fueling this trade, is number one is corruption, the deep-rooted corruption in Kenya and across East Africa that we are grappling with. You find that a lot of our park enforcers, our managers there are being coerced into taking part in this trade, because you'll find that most of them are underpaid, and getting coerced becomes easier when when these criminals or cartels from overseas come and give them quick money, and which is a huge lump sum compared to what they earn on a monthly basis. So I would say corruption is one of the key factors that is driving this trade here in the country and across East Africa. And our porous borders, you'll find that officials are also not on the watch, and they take bribes, which becomes easy for all these wildlife parts that are being poached in our parks and reserves to move around. Another one is lack of community involvement in the management and running of tourism and conservation activities in our parks and reserves. You find that if communities are not involved, if communities are not incentivized enough, if communities do not see the value of the wildlife that is living next to them, then it becomes easier for them to take part, especially in bushmeat poaching, which is something that is very close to illegal wildlife trade, because we are losing a lot of species to bushmeat poaching. For example, during COVID, where there was no tourism really, and there was no money for the local people who are employed in tourism facilities in near parks and reserves. So there was no food. So the quickest thing that they will turn to is this wildlife. So if the community does not take ownership of these resources that is closest to them, if they are not involved, if they are not welcomed at the decision-making table and given the space to manage, given the space to run their activities, given the space to empower themselves through these assets that are close to them, then it becomes very hard for us, for entities of organizations who are pro-conservation, to halt this illegal wildlife trade. Another key driver of this trade is the demand, international demand for these wildlife products, and the interconnectedness of our world right now. You'll find that this trade has gone online. The movement of money has become easy, accessibility, the mobility of people and goods from one country to another has become so quick and so fast, so the interconnectedness of the criminal network, because one country can be doing a lot in terms of managing her efforts to stop the trade, and other countries are not doing so much enough. So the demand for ivory and rhino horn and the pangolin parts, as you've mentioned, is one of those things that really is driving the illegal wildlife trade. And the more markets are open, the more accessible other countries are, then it becomes easy for this trade to take part. So yeah.
And this type of activity, what is the role of banks and money transfer agencies and hawala businesses in supporting and aiding and abating the wildlife trade, the illegal wildlife trade? And what do you think they could do to make themselves better aware of the fact that they are inadvertently, of course, we expect, promoting and supporting illegal wildlife trading?
Thank you for that, Saldis. I think when you talk about illegal wildlife trade, we are talking about a trade. And when we talk about trade, there is something that goes in exchange. So it's the wildlife products, and then we get the money, And when you look at this trade from a pyramid perspective, you will find at the bottom of the pyramid there is the community or the people on the ground. And at the bottom is the brokers, and at the top you'll find the cartels, the people with the big bucks, with the people with the big money. And the movement of these funds from the local ground to the people at the top really is something that we need to look at. And I'm glad that we had that webinar and we were able, to bring in these professionals from the fintech and banking industry to understand how this trade is and how it is conducted. So I think it becomes very hard for the people who are in that industry to monitor, to track, and to prevent the movement of these monies that are illicit and are moving from one person to another without taking into account what has happened for these gains to happen. And when we look at the systems that are in place, I think we need to to set up systems that are tough, the systems that are we are able to understand and also replicate at the local level. And I think what needs to be done in for the people, what role rather that the banking and the fintech stand to play is to understand the value that this wildlife means to communities, to our economy, and when we understand that, that's when now we begin to set up systems and processes that detect, prevent, monitor and track these funds, and bringing freezing their accounts really, or even bringing them to book, and recovering these assets. So when we talk about the whole scope of how this money moves from one country to another, it's, for example, through, you can highlight M-Pesa, which is big in East Africa. You can highlight banks, you can highlight mobile money transfers, and it will be very interesting to see what systems we set up, because when we talk about this trade, we are talking about exchange, and it's exchange for wildlife products and for money. So it will take a lot of collaboration, a lot of partnerships, a lot of understanding between partners, between people in the financial sector. I'm glad that you brought this about, for professionals to understand why this trade is happening. How can we stop it? How can we be able to understand its effects? So it's something that we really need to look at, and the more the world becomes technologically advanced, the more it will become harder, for us to track and to monitor, all this, the whole web of illegal wildlife trade. So it will take up a lot of hands on deck on this one, and to try to track these funds and to try to stop and to recover these illegal proceeds that people gain out of slaughtering our wildlife here in Africa.
There is the increasing issue of human-animal conflict. How do you see that playing out in East Africa, and what is the future, in your view, of humans and animals living more harmoniously together in the future?
Thank you for that, Saldis. Human-wildlife conflict is something that is hard. It's something that we've grappled with. It's something that we are trying to find solutions to. And some of the drivers to this conflict is population growth. You will understand that our population is rapidly increasing day by day, and this puts pressure on our wide places, and you'll find that people compete for needs, for resources, for food, and with animals really. And as humans take up more spaces, as you've mentioned, then it becomes hard for these wildlife to roam around, to feed, whether it's to breed, whether they move around, to find, to mate, or to meet other to go and breed and feed in other areas. Then it becomes very hard if there is a barrier to it. And I'm glad that you've mentioned that video, which went viral a couple of, I think, months ago, and that was very sad to see. And what that meant for the boy is seeing his cow, being eaten really by that lioness, and the tourists were there taking pictures. So it was a very, very sad picture. It was a very sad video to see. And human wildlife conflict is something that is driving some species to extinction. For example, elephants, because of the rampant human elephant conflict. You'll find that elephants like moving a lot, towards areas that are cultivated, areas that have crops, because most of the communities that are living near these protected areas, you'll find that they farm, and these farms attract animals like elephants into the farms. And when these animals attack, or rather go into these farms and feed these crops that have been cultivated by these farmers, then it becomes a problem. You'll find that these communities who really have not taken ownership of the wildlife, and there is no communication, or rather mutual coexistence between the two, then they attack this wildlife, and kill. It's a problem that is happening. And population, the rapid population growth is one thing that is driving human wildlife conflict across East Africa. And the rapid development, also infrastructure development, is a problem, because you'll find that the more the more the population growth, the more we will need electricity, the more we will need roads, the more we will need energy. And where do we set up these things that will enable us to survive and thrive also? So it's a delicate balance between balancing the needs of people and wildlife. And what can be done to reduce human wildlife conflict is education and awareness. Going to the ground and educating the local people on why we are trying to conserve this wildlife. And the best way to do this is to incentivize wildlife conservation, and to help and to make the community benefit from this, and to bring in their perspective, their indigenous knowledge in running conservation. Another way is adopting measures to reduce human wildlife conflict, like fencing off some of the areas that are adjacent, or the borders where the parks reach, or the conservancy reaches, and where the community land is, fencing off those areas and erecting strong fences to prevent these animals, especially elephants, which are notorious in this conflict, from moving from their natural habitat into communal lands. And another way to reduce this conflict is increasing funding for conservation activities. As I mentioned earlier, over 65% of wildlife in Kenya is found in communal lands. And if we don't have proper management practices, if we don't adopt proper ways to mitigate and to ensure that this wildlife is safe and that humans are safe, then we will have a problem. We have had problems of compensation in Kenya, whereby you find that maybe a lion has attacked a village in the Mara, or in a pastoralist community, and it has killed several goats or sheep, then injured a couple of people who are trying to defend their cattle. Then it becomes a problem for the government. It has always been a problem because our people haven't been compensated well enough when human wildlife conflict occurs. So tracking down these cases and increasing compensation, because human life is more important also in the process. It's not just about conserving wildlife, it's just not about increasing wildlife numbers. We also have to take care of our people, and also another key factor which we need to mention here is women empowerment. You'll find that most of our women lack education, lack family planning, information. So going to the ground and educating them on ways which they can, be able to reduce their numbers, to reduce, the number of children they get, then it will be very easy for us to ensure the delicate balance of the needs between people and wildlife is achieved in the long run. So women empowerment is crucial. We need not to assume it. We need to involve our women in the conservation conversation, and we also need to empower them to take up leadership roles. As we also need to educate our girls so that they can, take up these leadership positions. They can also, manage their families well, because you'll find that in the villages, in the pastoral areas, a lot of children are being born, and there is lack of, proper education, proper, livelihoods for them. So that is why there's these cases of people going into the parks, these cases of wildlife coming into contact with people, because agriculture is something that is big in East Africa and Kenya, especially because people want to eat, people want to feed. The women need to feed their children. The women need to fetch firewood for cooking or for lighting up their homes. So how can we ensure that we create that delicate, harmonious balance where people and nature can survive and thrive? So it's a matter of, involving the community into and empowering them really, and bringing all these aspects into play. So that we can mitigate and cure this ill of human wildlife conflict.
To conclude our conversation today, I'd be really grateful if you could tell our audience a little bit more about Boots on the Ground, about your inspiration for setting it up, and really about the reason and the motivation that keeps you going with this really worthwhile work that you're doing.
Thank you for that, Saldis. I'll be glad to answer your question. Boots on the Ground started really in 2020. I was at home for 6 months after COVID happened around 2020 March. As you know, travel was at a halt. International borders were shut, so there was no travel going on in across Africa really, and in Kenya particularly. So after being sent home after we were told to go home, and we didn't know that it will extend over 3, 6, 7, 8 months into the future, And as I was at home, I took part in reading. I love reading and listening to podcasts, and I did my own research as to how many podcasts are there for travel in the country, and I couldn't find even one. So in October of 2020, I was at home here in Masailand, so I went back to Nairobi and got a few equipment here and there, and set up the the podcast, which was initially called Travel Local Podcast, to encourage local the domestic market here in Kenya to travel local and to support local tourism and local businesses which were struggling. So the first podcast or episode rather was recorded in Sagana, in an area called Sagana, with a friend of mine, which was really insightful. Which we were talking about the area, why it's attractive, the features there, the natural landscapes, the river, whitewater rafting, and all those activities. So the more and more I went on to do more episodes, the more guests I got, especially after doing the Women in Travel series, where I invited women to share their stories of travel. I found out that they did more than travel. It was not just the glamour, the fun part. It was not just the luxury. But some of them were coming in to support communities. Some of them were coming in, to do conservation. For example, there's this one I did for with Selengei, a lady who works who does elephant conservation in the Amboseli. These are stories of hope. These are stories of people who have given their time, given their resources to be on the ground, to support conservation, to support communities, to educate people. So these are stories which moved me initially. So that made me to rebrand this podcast to Boots on the Ground, to highlight the strides being made by these great men and women in the conservation and tourism space. And Boots on the Ground podcast primarily focuses on three themes, which are wildlife conservation, biodiversity preservation, and climate change. And it's a podcast that seeks to highlight stories across Africa, stories of conservation, stories of hope, of resilience, of why our wildlife matters, of why our natural resources matter, of why we need all hands on deck. We need our voice as Africans to join hands and to do conservation. So until now, I have done over 60 episodes, and we are available in all of the listening platforms that you may know for podcasting, and to the broader public across the globe, you can tune in and you can listen. So my aim for forming this podcast and for bringing this forward is to share, is to educate, is to make people act at an individual level, to inspire action and minds to think about these issues, to take up action in any way, whether small or big, where we are, in taking the conservation of our resources forward, and to bring in these stories of hope, stories of great, strides being made by exemplary women and men on the ground, really, to propel the conservation agenda for Africa forward.
Yes, what a worthy cause for which a podcast should exist. There are so many podcasts around the world, but I think Boots on the Ground, in my opinion, couldn't be more worthy than those that are out there. I'd like to really take this opportunity on the behalf of the ARMC Perspectives team to thank you so much for making this time to spend with us, to talk a little bit more and give us a bit more of an insight into your life in the world of wildlife preservation and in the world of wildlife tourism, and to give us more insights into the illegal wildlife trade and give us some solutions really that we can all take back to our workplaces when we think about how we try to work in the financial services sector to prevent the illegal wildlife trade. We wish you all the best. We hope that you'll be able to join us in the near future in other webinars and roundtables as we continue to promote the message around the positive role that the financial services sector can play in tackling this trade. Till we get a chance to talk again, I wish you all the best. I wish you good health and stay safe. And look forward to connecting with you in the very near future.
Thank you so much, Saldis. I appreciate a lot. Thank you.